Hello, classmates. Previously, we studied some international trade theories, such as actual model. It is common to hear trade theories criticized for not being relevant to real world or for having unrealistic assumptions. Does actual model reflect the international trade in the real world? Lots of economists have tested empirically. Today, we will study these issues, focusing on the following contents. First, Leontief paradox. Second, explanations to Leontief paradox. Third, comments on actual model. First, Leontief paradox. The first attempt to investigate the factor endowment theory empirically was undertaken by Vasily Leontief in 1953. Leontief won the Nobel Prize in 1973. This comprehensive test influenced empirical research in this area ever since. Leontief made use of his own invention and input-output table to test the actual prediction. It had been widely recognized that in the United States, capital was relatively abundant and the labor was relatively scarce. According to the factor endowment theory, the United States will export capital-intensive goods, and its importing competing goods will be labor-intensive. Look at Table 1. Leontief tested this proposition by analyzing the capital over labor ratio for some 200 capital industries and import competing industry in the United States based on trade data for 1947. Leontief found that the capital over labor ratio for US export industries was lower than that of its import competing industries. The former is about 15,000 per worker year. The latter is about 18,000 per worker year. Leontief concluded that exports were less capital intensive than import competing goods. These findings that contradicted the predictions of the factor endowment theory became known as the Leontief paradox. To strengthen his conclusion, Leontief repeated his investigation in 1956, only to again find that US import competing goods were more capital intensive than US exports. Leontief's discovery was that American comparative advantage was something other than capital intensive goods. Second, explanation to Leontief paradox. Leontief paradox has produced many studies seeking to explain why this unexpected finding might have occurred. The first explanation is the natural resources factor are neglected. Leontief uses a two-factor model to test actual model, ignoring other factors, especially natural resources. In fact, some products are neither labor-intensive products nor capital-intensive products. But natural resources-intensive products, for example, 60% to 70% of American imports are primary products. Most of these primary products are wood and mineral products. These products are highly natural resources intensive. To classify these products as capital-intensive products invisibly increases the ratio of capital to labor of American imports, thus creating a mystery. The second is that it might be that the United States was mainly exporting goods that used skilled labor. This is certainly true today. With the United States being a leading exporter of high technology products, and was probably also true in 1947. The United States has an advantage in highly skilled labor more than capital. This can be regarded as more broad capital. That is, highly skilled labor includes human capital. Using this definition, the exports of the United States are human capital intensive and not particularly intensive in unskilled labor. The United States may be exporting goods that heavily use skilled labor and innovative entrepreneurship, such as aircraft and sophisticated computer chip, while importing heavy manufacturers, such as automobile, that use large amount of capital, but not distinguish between skilled versus unskilled labor. Leontief was again giving an inaccurate picture of the factors of production used in US trade. The third is that there exists trade barrier. According to H.O. theorem and the Stolpen-Samuelson theorem, the labor will be more protectionist than owner of capital will. Therefore, US government tends to impose trade barriers on the imports of relatively labor-intensive goods, which may result in more capital-intensive goods importing. Baldwin in 1971 shows that if US imports are unrestricted, the proportion of labor in the imports will be 5% higher than it actually is. The fourth explanation is that factory intensity reversal may occur. Factory intensity reversal happens when a good is produced in one country by relatively capital-intensive method, but is produced in another country by a relatively labor-intensive method. It occurs when a commodity has different relative factor intensity at a different relative factor. When factor intensity reversal exists, it is not possible to specify unambiguously which good is capital-intensive and which is labor-intensive, and the actual theorem cannot be valid for both countries. Last, comments on actual model. Other studies have also moved calculating Leontief statistics, and often beyond examining only the United States. Many factors of production in many countries have been included, but the empirical testing of the actual model has produced mixed results. It doesn't mean that differences in factor abundance don't help explain the observed patterns of trade across the countries. In fact, the pattern of trade between developed and developing countries fits well with the prediction of the actual model. But economists also believe forces besides factor endowments and factor intensities increasingly need to be considered. Besides, the actual model also remains vital for understanding the effects of trade, especially its effect on the distribution of income. That's all for this lecture. Thanks for joining. See you next time.